Welcome to See You on the Other Side, where the world of the mysterious collides with the world of entertainment. A discussion of art, music, movies, spirituality, the weird, and self-discovery. And now, your hosts, musicians and entertainers who have their own weakness for the weird, Mike and Wendy from the band Sunspot.
Today we're talking to you. This is the Tuesday after Labor Day, September 4th. And the episode this time is something we haven't broached yet, a topic we haven't attacked yet in the past 210 episodes. And that's faith healing. Now, Wendy, what do you know? Have you ever been to a faith healer yourself?
I can't say I have, actually.
No, either have I.
And the first thing that comes to mind when I think of that is that movie with Steve Martin.
Yes, Leap of Faith. Meatloaf is in it too.
Oh, man. Yes. I mean, just purely based on the terms, of course, the term faith healing, it just reminded me of that movie because, it's a great movie.
Yes. But I thought of that too when we talked to the guest today, Josh Tongol. And Josh is part of a whole different culture. This Filipino Christian culture that he was talking about, that he was raised in. And we get into this into the interview, where they believe that these miracles can happen.
Cool.
That people can be healed by faith.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's an interesting thing, and I obviously think that people can take advantage of other people with this kind of thing fairly quickly. You know, the more money you give, the better the chance that Jesus will heal you. Yeah. But at the same time, you know, I remember in college, I was a psych major in college 100 years ago, and even 100 years ago, we would talk about, like, kids would play these video games where they would fight their cancer cells. Mm-hmm. And they would run these experiments, and this seems kind of like, who wants to be part of the control group that's not, thinking and fighting your cancer cells with video? That's kind of depresses me, there were kids who didn't get to be part of the control group, who didn't get to be part of the video game thing. But the attitude they had, the using their brain or whatever, or imagining fighting the cancer cells, led to they would have a greater remission rate.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, and so it's still not causation equals correlation kind of thing, because we're talking about psychology, and there's so many factors in psychology, right, the types of cancer and everything. But the fact is that they did seem to have some correlation between this idea of the kids fighting and defeating the cancer cells in their brain and the game they were playing and all that, and then some kind of higher rate of remission in the cancer. And I always found that fascinating. And as a lesson, as you got to be as positive and faithful, you got to believe as much as you can. And it seems like the most important situation of, I don't know about the faith, and I don't know about Jesus healing you and stuff like that, but it seems like the most important place to fake it till you make it is sickness. And so that's kind of the context I'm looking at when I talk to Josh, and because he's got a very spiritual approach to it, and he's not a Christian anymore, but he still is a very spiritual person that believes something out there is healing people, and that he might have the power to heal himself.
All right. Well, I can't wait to hear this, Mike.
Let's talk to Josh. We're here with Josh Tongol, all the way from Manila in the Philippines.
Yeah.
What time? Okay, so it's 1 o'clock here in Madison, Wisconsin. What time is it there in the Philippines?
Oh, it's only 2 or 3 in the morning.
All right, so it's just getting to be bar time. Where are you? Okay, and is it still hot in the middle of the night in August in the Philippines?
Yeah, it's really hot, especially because I closed all the windows and the doors, so just trying to make sure we have perfect sound.
Right.
And no ACs on right now,
That's
so
right.
It's all good though.
Okay, we got you in the sauna for this.
Yeah. For the sake of good quality.
You are in the literal hot seat.
Yeah.
Well, Josh, you're in the Philippines right now, but that's not where you started, and physically, and it's also not where you started on your spiritual journey. And so that's the kind of stuff we're talking about today.
Sure.
So let's get into it a little bit. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in California pretty much my whole life. So, yeah, that's where I was born and raised.
Okay, so you started out in California, and what kind of religious community did you start out with? Like my sister and I always talk about our Catholic upbringing and the stories we have from that. And so what was your first introduction to the unseen world?
Okay. Yeah, so pretty much I was born into a Christian home. So my parents, they started off as Catholics, but then by the time I was born, they were already considered what would be called Protestant Christian, or what in the Philippines we would call born again. So they just use different labels here. But yeah, I was born into a Protestant Christian home, and it wasn't necessarily meaning that I was just born into it and I didn't believe in it. In fact, I believed in it wholeheartedly. And should I just go straight into my journey?
Absolutely. That's the stuff we're interested in today, like how you became a spiritual healer and an astral traveler and all that kind of stuff.
Okay.
Like how did you get there? So where did you start?
Sure. So that took a long time, man. But yeah, so I was born into this Christian home, and obviously there are so many different types of Christianities when you really think about it, right? I mean, just there could be two churches down the street that are completely different from each other, even though they claim the same faith. And so I belong to a type of Christianity that would be considered the charismatic kind of Christianity, meaning that it's a type of Christianity where we believe in the gifts of the Spirit. And so we would be talking about like have meetings where people are speaking in tongues and falling down, which we would call slain in the Spirit, and people even having like open heaven visions, prophesying, healing, Holy Ghost laughter. I mean, this stuff is very out of the box, even for some what we would call conservative Christians, so my whole life, bro. Go ahead.
Just going into really quick, I'd never heard of Holy Ghost laughter before.
Yeah, so it's a trip.
What is that?
It's basically where some Christians believe that God can speak to or minister to individuals in any way possible. And so the Holy Ghost laughter was just a type of, I guess you could say, a phenomenon or a manifestation where people just experience this very ecstatic joy bubbling up inside of them to the point of uncontrollable laughter. And so that's just something that I'm not saying it's a Christian thing, but it is something that is found within certain forms of a charismatic kind of Christianity. Obviously, you don't find that at the more conservative types of Christian meetings, where, I mean, some churches, they don't even stand up and raise their hands during singing or worship, but my type of environment was a very free-flowing, sing to the top of your lungs. Many times we're very emotional. And so my life, for most of my life, aside from a skeptical period that I'll be referring to later, I've always been open to stuff that are considered out of the ordinary. And I've always been fascinated with near-death experiences, out-of-body experiences. I mean, ever since I was a little kid, I remember my mom telling me stories about people who went to heaven and they saw Jesus and, just talking about the environment that they were in. I was like, dude, as a little child, I remember like, I would want to experience those things. And I didn't have a hard time believing those things. I didn't have that kind of like doubting mentality because my family was into that stuff. And I could vividly remember experiences.
If the Holy Ghost can give you a tickle torture, then all bets are off.
Pretty much. Yeah. So it's like I'm game for anything, right? But I do have some vivid memories of like a time when I was really small, probably like at the age of 5, not necessarily sure exactly which age, but I was really small. And I remember I was in my bedroom and it was late at night and it was very crystal clear, but at the corner of my bedroom, like up at the top towards the ceiling, I remember seeing like this floating ghostly figure just staring at me, and it didn't hurt me. It didn't make any noise. It was just floating there looking at me. And, I was a kid, right? So obviously I screamed to the top of my lungs, and then my parents came in the room and then they prayed over me. And then, surprisingly, I just went to bed. I still slept in the same bed, and, so that was a very vivid memory that I had as a kid. That was just very strange.
Well, that's keeping it pretty cool.
Yeah, yeah, pretty much. And I remember another time, as I got older, there was this one time when my dad and I were about to head out somewhere. And my dad was like, hey, Joe, because my nickname is Joe, is like, just close a sliding door. Because we have this really big sliding door that separates the patio from the living room. So I was like, yeah, whatever. Okay, I'll just close it. So I closed it. But as I was walking away, I literally saw this flash of light come from behind me. It's as if somebody took a picture of me with the flash on, and I heard the sound like that, exactly like that, kind of like a lasery sound, like, and I was like, what? And then I turned around, and then I heard my dad say, hey, I told you to close the door. And then I looked, and then the door was completely open. And so I always remembered that experience, not really knowing how to explain it or how to interpret it. You know what I'm saying? But that's just a kind of some of the stuff that happened as I was growing up in this Christian environment. But what was really something that really impacted my life, which was something that you obviously can't see over audio, But as you know now, Mike, with that I was only born with only one hand. And that was something that I struggled with pretty much most of my life, especially when I was a little kid. Unfortunately, right, some kids could be pretty cruel. Not all, but a lot of them were. And so because of that, it brought about a lot of insecurity.
Well, that's a tough thing with sports and everything, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I've had to. It's funny, but I think it was like 2 days ago, I saw someone playing baseball, with the mitten, glove. And it's for some reason 2 days ago, it just brought back memories when I was in elementary school, having to play baseball and having to remove my glove. Once I catch the ball, I have to remove it and then I have to throw the ball. Like I've always had to pivot, I've always had to adjust. But obviously some kids, instead of admiring those things, they just chose to make fun of it for whatever reason. And so, those were just some of the things that I was struggling with. And so because what brought about the struggle even more was that I believed in this God based upon, the kind of church that I was in, that we believed in miracles. And so when you believe in miracles and you're born a certain way and you don't want to be a certain way because of just the way you've been treated, it's like I wanted God to give me a miracle of two hands. So what I would do is I would pray some nights, just praying that one day I would wake up and boom, I have two hands, So I would like cry myself to sleep sometimes. And I remember going from one, what we would call Miracle Crusade. There are these really big ass events where like there's these faith healers that come into town. And I would do that, like go from one crusade to another with like some very big names, and then nothing would happen. But the major turning point in my life, bro, was when I was 17 years old. And I found out that there was another famous faith healer in town. I mean, this was like probably the biggest name at the time without mentioning his name. And I remember I had so much faith that I was telling my friends at school who weren't Christian, I'm like, I'm going to go to this crusade and I'm going to come back with two hands. And I wanted to tell them as a way to kind of show to them that Christianity's, the right way and Jesus is the right way and stuff. And so, my friends came with me. And so when I went to this event, this is a really big event in Anaheim, California. And I mean, there's thousands of people there. I was lifting up my hands up in the air, like crying and praying out to God, asking him to heal me. And, the environment was very, very intense. It was very emotional because obviously there were a lot of people there who were seeking for miracles. There were people in wheelchairs. I mean, and of course, a faith healer was saying things to help stir up so there would be some faith in the room, So I was getting excited. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm going to have two hands. And, but nothing was happening. And I just kept crying. And I'm sure my friends were wondering, like, what's going on? Nothing's happening to Josh. And so I told my friends, I said, take me down to the stage so the faith healer can lay hands on me. Because I thought maybe if the faith healer physically laid hands on me, that something would happen. So as I was going down to the stage, it was just so crowded. Like there were just too many people. And by the time we were kind of close, the guest speaker just said, come back tomorrow. And I was like, oh crap. Like for one thing, I didn't get healed, which was disappointing. And another thing, I was also embarrassed because nothing happened. And my friends were also wondering what's going on. And it actually backfired, kind of looked at the event as kind of like a joke. They were like mimicking the faith healer when we were walking to the car, like fire, fire, like shooting fireballs because the faith healer was very showy. Where people were falling down and he's like throwing these invisible fireballs kind of thing where people were falling down. So my friends were just kind of making fun of it. But I was like, whatever, I'm going to go back. And so I did go back and then obviously nothing happened. And so that was a really big turning point for me when I was 17, where it's not that I was angry at God, like the God that I believed in at that time, but it was more so like I came to the conclusion, maybe God doesn't do these kinds of things today. And so at that same time, with that experience, I was a senior in high school. My teacher, I found out, was a Christian. And she was what you would call a Christian apologist. And an apologist is basically someone who defends the faith. So for example, there are Muslim apologists, there are Christian apologists. So defending in the sense that, for example, if you were to ask me, how do you know the Bible is true? A Christian apologist would have answers, to refute the arguments against the doubters, the skeptics. We would be able to prove Christianity, the Bible, intellectually, philosophically, historically, just trying to prove.
That kind of thing it's happening. You go through a lot of things in your life and you're talking about how you're, raised in a very fervent religious environment.
Yeah.
Yet, you see tragedies happening in the world. You see, horrible things, kids with cancer, the Holocaust, all these kind of things. And you think the apologist's job is to just let you know that God works in mysterious ways.
Pretty much,
so
yeah.
don't sweat it.
Yeah. I mean, there was
Right.
always an explanation, right? But yeah, so when I was getting into apologetics, I got like heavily involved in it. Like it was something that actually changed my life, because growing up as a little kid in the church, I didn't really question anything ever. That's why I would go from faith healer to faith healer. If someone said something at the sermon in a sermon on a pulpit, I believed it. I mean, I was always just like that kid that believed everything. That's why when I learned apologetics, it was kind of double-edged, because for one thing, it got me to be skeptical in a certain way, which I think is healthy. Even to this day, I still find myself to be a skeptical person unless there's good evidence for me to believe something otherwise, right? But at the same time, I ended up throwing out the baby out with the bathwater, because the majority of Christian apologists, at least in North America, that I was into, that I was learning from, that I was going to school and learning from them directly, they were Christians who were not just critical of non-Christians. Like, for example, they would criticize Judaism, Islam, and they would criticize what they would consider to be cults like Mormonism, Jehovah's Witnesses. But Christian apologists are also extremely critical of certain forms of Christianity, specifically the kind that I was growing up in, like the very charismatic faith healer, the guys that you see on TV. And so I developed that mentality.
Sure, they weren't big into snake handlers.
Exactly. I mean, good thing we didn't do that, though. But, it gave me a healthy sense of, well, I don't know about healthy. I became more cautious and open. So even though at that time I still believed that, oh yeah, God can do miracles because the Bible talks about miracles, but any miracle claim that I've heard, I didn't believe it, no matter what. And I developed this mentality for 8 long years. And I wasn't the type of skeptic who was just very passive and just like, I don't believe it. I had an agenda. And honestly, I do believe that my agenda came from a good heart, because my agenda was to expose these faith healers, to expose these charlatans, because most of my life, pretty much, although I've attended so many miracles, all of the miracles that were allegedly claimed, it did seem questionable, because I didn't really see like a real miracle that was just so self-evident, like, oh yeah, there's no way to deny that. Like, there was always something that I could poke a hole in. You know what I'm saying?
So give me an example of that. Give me an example of a miracle that you're like, okay.
Yeah, so for example, when I went to that event when I was 17, I remember people coming up to the front and testifying that God was healing them of like their cancer, because they were feeling electricity all throughout their body. Like they were experiencing these certain manifestations in their body. And I could look back at that moment and be like, well, something's going on in her body, but that doesn't mean she's healed, because we still have to look at the x-rays. You know what I mean? And obviously at a crusade, they don't do the x-rays on the spot. And so I started to kind of like have a different grid and a different paradigm, just kind of reinterpreting a lot of my past experiences of people who were speaking in tongues and falling down, what we would call falling down in the spirit or slain in the spirit. I'm like, all right, the speaking in tongues, you can make it up, or it could just be, just babbling, saying banana backwards, or just, psychological, or people falling down. That could also be because of expectation. People fall down because they expect to fall down when a faith healer touches them, or there's just a lot of things like psychosomatic, you know what I'm saying? And so I pretty much, like what you were saying, I had an explanation for everything. And at the same time, wanting to help people, though, because I did feel like a lot of those guys I saw on TV were all charlatans, all fakes. They just wanted your money, or some of them were possibly honest, but they were just delusional. Like they didn't know better, because that's just how I thought.
Right. Well, that's totally plausible.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's why it was kind of like a double-edged thing for me, but at the same time, I look back now that I look back, I did throw the baby out with the bathwater, because I ultimately wasn't open to anything. But there was something that happened to me back in 2005 during this skeptical period. And keep in mind, like I said, I wasn't the passive type. I was so aggressive in this that I, quote unquote, deconverted a lot of Christians at my university who were believers in this supernatural miracle stuff, and they no longer were believing anymore because of my influence. I mean, I had my stories to share, and I had my arguments. But anyways, back to 2005, during the skeptical period became one of probably the toughest time in my entire life, to be honest, both physically and emotionally. But I was a breakdancer since I was a little kid, since elementary school. Despite my hand, I could still do breakdancing. I fell in love with that. I did that pretty much every day. It was like my life, But then in 2005, I attended a party. And then obviously during a party, we started dancing. There was a dance floor there. So I was like, cool. And then I saw there was a guy there. I don't even know him. And I just challenged him to a battle because that's just what we did back in the day. You know what I'm saying? And then, so we formed a circle and I did my little breakdancing little
Sure, I do that in the
performance.
street sometimes.
Cool. And so that's just what was going on. But when I was doing my thing on the ground, my little breakdancing performance, when I got up, it was hard to get up. And when I did get up, all of a sudden, everything below my waist got numb. Like it got super, super heavy. And that's never, ever happened before in all my life. And I never even had back pain. I don't ever remember having back pain ever. But that day, all of a sudden, everything below my legs got super numb and super heavy. And then all of a sudden, extremely painful, especially my back. And so what I found out eventually...
So did the guy get real cocky with you for you won the breakdance battle?
He probably had no idea.
Was he like, hey, sorry you're numb, but I'm still a badass?
Yeah, he probably had no idea because I remember when I was done, he went in because, he was responding to my stuff. He was doing his whole thing and I just couldn't go back in and he probably had no idea. We just stopped it and my friends, of course, were asking me if I was okay. But I eventually found out that I suffered from something called a herniated disc and something called sciatica. And so just for your audience, for them to understand this, is that in your spine, that the discs in between the vertebrae of my spine, they were basically being crushed and they were slipping out. And kind of like a jelly donut, the way they would describe it to me when I was in the hospital. It's like a squash, like a jelly donut, but it would pop out and pinch a nerve. And this caused excruciating pain from my back to my butt, all the way down to my legs, to my feet.
So just to be clear, you didn't get to eat the jelly donut.
Oh, no, too bad. Yeah, I did. But I mean, it was extremely painful, bro, where, like if I coughed, it hurt. Whenever I sneezed or even when I laughed, which is what I love to do, it hurt every single time, which is I would get nervous every time I laugh, unfortunately, or when I sit too long or I'd fall down just randomly, like my legs would give out because of the pinch in my nerves. It would just give out. And I remember it got so bad where my roommates back in college were like, dude, you got to get a wheelchair, and I took painkillers. I did physical therapy and a bunch of my Asian friends were like, do acupuncture because it works for them, but it didn't work for me. And unfortunately, bro, I just got worse. And I remember I had many nights where I cried myself to sleep, wondering what the heck's happening to my back. I'm still young and I was afraid that maybe I wouldn't even be able to have kids one day, because I was afraid I would never be able to carry my kid. I mean, just like thoughts like that, because I remember the many days when I would cry carrying my laptop from the library to my dorm. Like even the weight of a laptop was too much for me, or I would be stuck on the ground and I wouldn't be able to get up because my back was in so much pain. So I was thinking, dude, I mean, it's one thing for me to not dance anymore, which I really, really love to do, but now I can't even walk. I'm still stinking young. And then, not too long after that, which is so ironic, it just one thing piling up right after the other. I was at a friend's house for dinner one day, and then late in the evening, I started to feel severe pain in my chest and on the left side of my body. And I was feeling like it was a heart attack. And I drove home. I barely made it home because I felt like I was going to pass out when I was driving home. But I told my mom, I'm like, take me to the hospital. And they're like, we have no insurance. They didn't know what to do. And I as a religious person, I got down on my knees and I was confessing my sins because I honestly thought I was going to die. I felt like I was having a heart attack. I eventually went to the hospital and I found out that I was diagnosed with something called gastroesophageal reflux disease, which is called GERD. And it's something that I've never even heard of to that day. And I honestly, bro, like my whole life, I don't even remember having chest pains at all, really, or heartburn. Then all of a sudden, after that attack, after that day, I literally had chest pain and heartburn and the disgusting taste of vomit in my throat every single day, like every day. And I changed my diet. And I remember, even I have a vivid memory of just eating one little Lifesaver. And that one little Lifesaver screwed up my throat the entire day where I felt vomit in my mouth. And I was getting scared, like really, really scared, because the medicine wasn't helping. Changing my diet and trying to eat healthy didn't help. I would sleep with like elevated pillows, on the back of my head to keep the acid down. I did everything I could do to get better, but it just got worse. And I was like, what's the heck's going on? I'm still in my early 20s and I have these physical problems.
Yeah, that sounds like the worst, man. Like
It is.
heartburn on top of like leg pain and
Oh, yeah.
sciatica. Like my dad has sciatica, and so he's got to walk back and forth sometimes just to kind of, because it's a nerve. It's not like anything. It's the nerve that makes the rest of
Exactly.
your body feel weird.
Yeah, honestly,
So
yeah. It's like hell, bro, honestly. Yeah, and I was a pastor at this time. So I was actually asking the question to God, why? Like
absolutely.
I'm serving you, why? But at the same time, I was a very skeptical person that didn't believe in the miraculous, at least practically speaking. I didn't believe in it. That's why I no longer went to faith healers. But everything that I was trying, it didn't work. But another major turning point in my life was in 2006 when I met a man named William Beeson. And honestly, this changed my life forever, because here was this guy who was sharing his story to us. And they called him like a modern day Job. Now, for those listeners who don't know, Job was a guy in the Old Testament that suffered so much in the Bible. So they're calling this guy, Willie Beeson, like a modern day Job, because his body was literally like, it was like falling apart, dude. Like the discs in his back and his spine ruptured. And so he had to get 5 surgeries, a total of 7. He had to get 2 more. And he was bedridden 22 hours a day. And he went from this really big guy to a super, super scrawny guy in a wheelchair. Because, when you're bedridden for 22 hours and you're not working out your muscles, you just get super scrawny, like the atrophy and everything. And
well, I would eat chips all the time.
I know.
Like if I was bedridden all the time, I would just eat chips.
But this guy
and
was
Snickers
just like
bars and
stinking depressed, because he even showed us all the photos when he was in his wheelchair and he just wanted to die. His family was falling apart. His business was falling apart because he was just so depressed. And then he talked about how he went to a church for a healing service where he even said that he just did it for the sake of his wife, but he didn't expect anything to happen. But he went to this prayer service for healing, and he just said he just wants to die. He didn't think anything would happen. And then nothing did happen. But when he got home, then one night, he was just writing in his journal because he documents everything that he experiences. All of a sudden, he felt a strong wind come into his room. And all of a sudden, he ended up in heaven, that he claims to be heaven. And I remember hearing his story. I was like, what the heck? Because every heaven story that I heard during the skeptical period, because I've heard many of them, because charismatics would try to debate with me, to try to get me to believe again. I never believed any of them during that 8-year period. But when I was listening to this guy, it was, for some reason, I was starting to believe, because he brought in all the documentation, from UCLA. He had the medical records from Germany, and he was showing us before and after pictures. Basically, what happened when he was in heaven is that he was told by someone in this out-of-body experience that he says, you are going to be 100% healed, restored to your youth. He comes back to his body. Boom. He wakes up. He was telling his wife the story, what just happened to him, and she thought, oh, he's on too much morphine. So he's like, all right, whatever. He wakes up the next day. He stands up. He says, you know what? I stood up with no pain. That in and of itself was already a miracle for him. And then he took a couple of steps. That was already a miracle for him. He says, then I went outside and he ran a stinking mile and he started screaming, saying, God is real. God is real. I'm healed. I'm healed.
Well, what was heaven like for him? Did he describe his heaven experience?
Oh, of course.
Was heaven like angels and stuff?
Yes.
Or was it like a nightclub? What was happening for this guy?
So his explanation is that when he was there, he was walking down a street that was like a translucent gold, and people were wearing like these kind of white robes, kind of like the typical image you would have of heaven. But it's as if they were there. Yeah, it's like they knew who he was. And supposedly this being, this entity that was talking to him was supposedly Jesus. And Jesus showed him these big, really, really gigantic gates, and behind this gate was like this beautiful city. And I remember him telling me this, and he's like, was that the New Jerusalem, which is what's referred to in the Bible? He's like, I don't know. He's like, I didn't even know what the New Jerusalem was in the Bible, because he wasn't really a religious person. So he saw that stuff after his experience.
Did Jesus say why they picked him?
No, that was something that we even asked him after he spoke. He says that's something that he wonders to this day, because at that time, because he has met many people who didn't get healed. And that's why he feels so blessed that why did it happen to him? He doesn't know, but of course he's grateful, because after that, he was sharing his testimony everywhere. And when I heard him, I remember there was even a student right next to me, and she said, you know what? I'm a science person, and I don't know how to explain this. but she was believing it too, because, it's like when you bring documentation, it gives more credibility. It's not just some guy sharing his story, so he's probably full of it, possibly, or he's
Did he say that he could heal then now too? Like, so he's doing a tour saying like, it's unbelievable. Like, heaven is real. I got healed. You guys got to check it out. What was his, why was he coming just to talk about it? Or was he saying that he could help heal people too?
Well, I mean, he was talking ultimately about like the power and the love of God, that, like you could still try to believe, which is what was inspiring me, obviously, who had my own issues at that time, listening to him back in 2006 and stuff. So he wasn't claiming any superpowers, although his body was not normal. In fact, like I remember he would demonstrate stuff like, where he even admitted that he got a little cocky when he got healed because his body would just like beef up. Because remember, he was super skinny. Then all of a sudden, he told me about the time when his son touched him. And he's like, Daddy, I'm feeling all this like electricity on you. And his arm and his stomach, everything just started beefing up. And he's like, Josh, feel my arm. He's like, it's as hard as a rock. He's like, Josh, I don't even work out. I don't know what happened to my body. Kind of fast forwarding. But when I went to his house, he just went to his living room. He picked up the couch like nothing. I was like, dude. He's like, yeah, Josh, when I first got healed, I was picking up the couch and my brother was asking me, what's happened to you? He's like, I don't know what happened to my body. And even my professor.
Right, but if I can get in on that Jesus workout plan, if I can get in on that heaven,
exactly,
like, he should write a book
out.
called like the Jesus workout, and I would do it.
Exactly. And that's why there was something not normal about that. That
because I've been praying for abs my whole life.
But I do remember he even mentioned, I think it was doctors from UCLA, that the doctors, they didn't say it was like a religious explanation, but I think they did say like it was a miracle or something like that, or they didn't know how to explain it. But obviously it did happen. I mean, he even has an atheist who was there during that time of his suffering, and was there even after his miracle, and says, yeah, I'm still an atheist. I don't know how to explain it, but my friend was like this one day, and the next day he was completely normal. So his friend, I even met his atheist friend who testified and said, no, Willie's telling the truth. Like, he doesn't know how to explain it because he's still an atheist, but he couldn't deny that something happened to his friend. And so just to kind of backtrack, when I first met this Willie Beeson guy, I approached him after his talk and I just told him about my back. And he says, Josh, just give me your information. Well, we'll swap information. I'll keep in touch with you. So I was like, cool, and then he does keep in touch with me. He gives me the website where he received that prayer for healing at this church. And I remember when I clicked on it, it was like a typical Christian healing service church. You could imagine me rolling my eyes because that's just something that I grew up with and I got turned off by so much. But I'm like, all right, let me read the testimonies. And so they were sharing testimonies about like back pain or whatever, and I'm like, whatever, okay, that's probably just psychosomatic. And then I read a story about like someone getting healed of cancer. I was like, now if that's true, that is a big deal. But I was still kind of like not sure what to believe about it because I grew up with this stuff and I was skeptical. But then I came across a testimony of someone saying that at the healing service that their arm grew out, and I was like, what? And I was like really thrown off by that. I'm like, well, like a complete arm or just like a few inches? Like, I wasn't really sure. And so I remember like just even looking back at that moment, I remember even sharing that experience. I would actually cry sometimes because I remember it was such an extremely emotional moment for me, because I remember right after I read that website, I went down to the prayer chapel. This is at school, and I started crying. And for the first time in 8 years, my desire to be healed came back because I didn't have the desire anymore. And I was like, what? But I was still wondering, like, is this like a joke or, because I don't want to get hurt again. I don't want to go to some place and try to get healed and then nothing's going to happen. And so I'm just trying to condense everything. Then I went on this journey where I had this renewed interest in healing again, where I decided to revisit again, because obviously I grew up in it and then I got turned off for 8 years. And now I'm like, let me see if this stuff is legit. And then I was introduced to these people who I've never heard of before, who many of them were like intellectual people, because that was important to me. Because when I was growing up, a lot of the faith healers were very anti-intellectual, and I didn't like that, and
well, because a lot of the intellectuals will be like, what you're doing, they'll tell them they're full of crap or something.
Exactly.
So
exactly.
They're not going to be real hot on intellectuals because intellectuals use their intellect
exactly
and not
right?
their heart.
Exactly. So it's not just all fully run by emotions, they're like asking for evidence. So when I found out who these guys were, I read every single book I could find on, the miraculous, or what we would call paranormal phenomena, but particularly healing, because that was very important to me. So I would travel from place to place again, just like when I was a kid, with a different grid, like a different perspective. Okay, don't judge it based upon the faith healer, but just see if this stuff actually happens. So I started hearing about stories of people getting healed and people who operate in these kinds of abilities. And then I tried healing people myself, for the first time after all these years. And for the first time, I started seeing people get healed immediately. Like I remember praying for somebody with a cast on and crutches, and boom, like their pain went away. And their cast on was taken off not too long after that. And I kept experimenting and trying, it's like, oh my gosh, what's going on?
Well, what's happening with your sciatica and your acid reflux and everything at this time? So now you're interested in healing again, but what's happening in your body?
Yeah, so at this time, I was still having my issues, but it was weird, but even though I was still having my issues, I was still trying to understand this stuff and try to pray for people as well and do healing. And so I can get to that, what happened later on, but eventually, like my whole life was becoming this whole world of like, I guess you could call, I was experiencing the paranormal stuff, even though we don't use that word in Christianity really at that time. But I was being guided a lot through my dreams, and I was having these very vivid dreams of guidance of what to do at that time and people who I had to be careful about, and then I started to have these things kind of, I guess you could call these psychic abilities where, using Christian terminology, we would call them word of knowledge, where all of a sudden I would have these instances where I would just know things about people, like specific things, because I'm very skeptical too. Like if someone just gives me general information, I'm like, that's not psychic. You can say that about anybody, But then all of a sudden I remember just like chilling at the block in Orange County, and I was at the bookstore, and then all of a sudden I didn't expect it. I was just like standing next to someone, and then all of a sudden I was supposed to ask her about her dad.
And so how do these impulses come? So do they come where you hear a voice in your head saying, hey, dude, ask her about her dad?
Yeah.
Or
So,
is it your own thought that says, hey, I should ask this person about their dad?
Yeah.
I mean, does it seem to have, is it like coming from a thought inside you? Is it coming from outside you? Like, how does it show up in your brain?
Yeah, so they come in many different ways. And so there could be times where it can be like an audible type of voice, which I have had. I actually wrote about this in my second book. But this one was more of just like a random thought. Like it was so random and unexpected that it just didn't sound like me. Like, why would I just ask some girl about her dad and then find out about some sort of abuse or whatever? And I approached her, and then it was true. And I was like, dude, what's that? And there was even another incident where I was in school.
And did she get upset with you or anything?
No,
Because
no.
if you see a random person ask me about like a very personal question, I'd punch him in his face.
Well, thankfully, she wasn't you. No, she was totally cool with it. In fact, I was able to encourage her and help her. And that's where I started to like continue to experiment and try. Okay, I'm learning that we can receive this information in many different ways, either through like the mind's eye, you'll have an image, you'll even have a word pop up, or you could actually see some stuff with your eyes open. Or I remember there was a time I was in the library and I was just sitting next to a girl because we were just using the internet in the library. And all of a sudden I see this girl getting emotional. And I was like, all right, whatever. I don't know who she is. And all of a sudden this random name popped up. And I was like, excuse me, does this name mean anything to you? And then she's like, boom, she started crying. She's like, that's the person that I'm contacting about. I was like, oh my gosh. So I would have these experiences where I would even start to feel people's pain. And that's something that I still feel to this day in the work that I do, where I'm able to feel not just the emotions, but I could also feel the exact places where people are hurting when I'm around them sometimes. So for example, let's just say I'm out, like before I leave my house, my body's completely normal. And then I'm going to meet with a friend. And all of a sudden, when I sit in front of my friend, I feel a pain in my left knee. And I'm like, dude, is there something wrong with your left knee? And then boom, yeah. So I was like, oh, snap. So I started to learn to recognize that believe it or not.
Has that ever been embarrassing? It's
no.
Like, oh my God, like my right butt cheek is dying. So you got to be like, how's your
No. Surprisingly,
like, are your
people
glutes okay?
Surprisingly, people get really emotional and thankful because they think and believe that God cares enough about them that they're able to help them. At least that's been my experience. They're like, oh my gosh, how did you know that? And I was like, oh, well, let me just like, do a little healing on you to get better, just to let you know, hey, healing's on the way or something. So that's how I approached it. I never really had any negative reactions to that.
So there's never been anything like too dark or too weird that you're like, I can't, like, I need to like write a person like a private letter or send a note or something?
Nothing so far that was too private. I mean, especially if it was in a public setting, I wouldn't like announce it on a microphone or in a church service. They're always very private. Yeah.
At the same time, it's just the idea that if you're receiving anything, like even knowing about a pain in my knee, I'd be like, get out of my head. How do you know about a pain in my knee? What else are you seeing? I don't want you to see the rest of my secrets.
Oh, no.
You can see a pain in the knee.
Obviously, I don't share everything. I mean, I even had a conversation with a few people the other day. They were even saying, oh yeah, when I was with Josh, sometimes I talk to Josh and I feel like he's saying something, but he's just not saying something, so they get I'm like, yeah, because I don't need to say everything, because imagine if I said everything that comes to my mind, so I do pick and choose, I try to find the right setting that's appropriate because I'm not there to embarrass anybody, but I do feel like sometimes these things come so I could bring it to light in case they might need to hear some encouragement about it in the moment, especially because it's more so about a physical pain, not so much of an emotional thing all the time. It's usually physical. That's usually where I'm drawn, that I could feel like I'll feel a skin condition or something, or a pain in my wrist, and then there'll be fibromyalgia or something like that.
So you think it's a message from specific people on the other side or something like that, or
it could be, or it could
mostly
just
messages about living people, or is it messages about dead people anytime?
Oh, my experience would be the living. Yeah, so it's just basically I could come into contact, and I don't know necessarily how it could all work. Maybe it's just because of the energy. I could be sensitive to the energy, but that's just kind of how it works for me. I'm very drawn to healing because that's been my journey. So I'm very willing to do that. Like tomorrow I'm going to be praying for someone with a stroke, but that's like something that is planned. But there are days where I'm just like chilling in a mall and I'll see somebody with a cast on limping, and then, I'll just start praying for them. I'll do a healing on them in the middle of the mall. And just the past weekend, I hung out with people 3 days in a row, and we did healing at people at Krispy Kreme, a coffee shop, and another spot, like in front of everybody, because we're like, hey, and these people just start bawling. They just start crying. They're like, how did you know this? And I was just speaking to this one lady I've never met. And she's just like, she actually got kind of nervous when I was talking to her, but she was just like, yeah, how do you know that? And she just started crying. I'm like, I don't know. It just comes to me as I'm talking, so that's kind of how it works. Sometimes it's just sometimes as you're doing it, it just comes to you as you're doing it. We would call it like automatic speech. There are some people who do automatic writing. They just start automatically writing. They don't even know what they're writing. It just could be scribbles, starts forming. So at the same time, what I've realized all these years, bro, is that from my Christian background to where I'm at now, who no longer identifies himself as a Christian, I realize that everybody has these abilities. Just some people are more aware of them than others. That's why in my training, when I go around the country, here in the Philippines or even in the States, I would teach people anybody can do this. It's just we don't learn to pay attention. Usually we have a random thought and we're like, oh, whatever, it's just a random thought. No, pay attention to that. Or you feel a random pain when you're out in public. Pay attention to that. And so some people are just more in tune to it than others because they learn to pay attention.
So when you're praying for someone's healing, though, so let's say, you meet somebody, or you first of all, so you walk into a room. Let's say it's a party.
Yeah.
You're like, my arm. So you start feeling a random pain, and then you're like, whose arm hurts around here? Or do you see the person too?
No, sometimes I have to ask. Yeah, honestly. But sometimes it'll be the person right next to me, which makes more sense. But when I'm doing like a healing service, like a healing event, obviously there's a bunch of people that are in front of me that I do have to ask. But sometimes it could happen when I'm looking directly at them, and there's that kind of, it goes in sync that right when I see them, I feel it. So I'll say, is there someone right here? Because I'm pointing to a certain direction in the crowd, but it's a big crowd. But I have to be very specific, so it'll be applicable to them. Because I could just say, hey, anyone here with a back pain? Obviously, there's a lot of people in the audience that has a back pain. So I have to be specific. You know what I'm saying? Because,
What do you think is the most, the case that you've had that made you believe in whatever it is the most? Is there a specific instance?
Yeah. I mean, this might sound weird to maybe even you or your listeners, but honestly, it's when I saw body parts grow. And so, just before I forget, long story short, when it comes to my own body, thankfully, and I'm so happy, my back's completely healed and my GERD's completely gone. 100%. And that's something that when I just think about it, trust me, bro, my wife can even like testify. I get emotional thinking about it because I think about it every day. To be honest, every day I put on a backpack, a heavy backpack. The food that I eat every day, bro. I mean, I eat a lot of stuff that people say people my age shouldn't be eating that stuff. That stuff that they would eat in there when they're, young. But I still eat a lot of this stuff where I in a way, I do feel like my body's not quote unquote normal because I push the limits that a lot of people my age wouldn't be eating, even like late at night. Like I told you, I go to sleep like at 5 a.m, right? So I mean, I could drink. I know people will criticize me for this, but I'll drink like an energy drink, like at 2 a.m, and then go straight to bed.
Well,
but I'm
not gonna criticize you for it. It's your body. You can do what you like.
Yeah.
And if you want to have a Red Bull at 2 o'clock in the morning, gosh darn it, have your Red Bull at 2 o'clock in the morning.
Or like, I'm a chips guy, and I eat a lot of chips and chocolate. But back in the day, bro, when I had my GERD, like I said, one little thing that's like ketchup or soda, anything, I'm screwed up the whole day, bro, the whole day. So like, I know something happened to my body. For sure. And I've had people tell me when I had my GERD who were in the medical field, because a lot of us Filipinos are nurses, but they would just tell me, they're like, Josh, you're going to have this the rest of your life. You're just going to have to maintain it, taking the medication. And I believed it at that time when I was a skeptic, like, oh my gosh, but now they know my story. Those people who are still my friends to this day, they were there at that journey of mine when I was sick and in a lot of pain and couldn't eat anything. And they look at me now like, They know something happened to me. Now they could say it's God, the universe, or self-healing, whatever, but something definitely is different with my body, bro.
Did it happen overnight? Did like your back problems, like did you wake up one morning like, hey, I feel great?
No, my back my back problem was a progressive one, but I could honestly say it was progressively faster than I know a lot of people would expect from a back getting better. And especially because of what I can do now, where I could still lift weights or carry heavy things. And my GERD did disappear like overnight. Like I just noticed it one day. Like I went to the cafeteria and I'm like, I took a risk because the way faith healing works is that I've learned that you got to do what you're not supposed to do. Now, that's not something I'm telling your audience to do, but that's just how I do it. Like you won't know you're healed, right? Unless you try something that you're not supposed to be doing. Like if Jesus told someone get up and walk who's a crippled, they'll be like, hello, I'm a cripple, I can't walk. So you're healed when you do the thing you're not supposed to do. So I took a step of faith when I was in the cafeteria at my school. And I'm like, all right, I'm going to try eating hamburgers and pizza. And I did it and it was completely gone. There was nothing and it didn't come back. And so that's what people know. So that's the thing, bro. It's funny. People at my school knew me as the guy who got a lot of people to not believe. And then they knew me as the guy after that healing of mine as the guy who was trying to tell everybody, hey, no, this stuff's real. So they would call me like the Apostle Paul of healing back in my university because Paul was the persecutor of the church, supposedly in Christianity. And all of a sudden he became the main proponent of Christianity, so from enemy to a proponent. And so that's how I feel about my own healing journey.
So you came around to, but when you said you saw like body parts grow or anything,
I could get
I'm
back
gonna
to
need
that.
an example on that.
Yeah,
one.
so you could even see that it's even on YouTube. But it happened when I was in San Diego doing a conference on healing. So I was the guest speaker that had to do with healing, and the other speakers were talking about other stuff. And I remember there was a service where a girl said that her leg is shorter than the other. And I've heard about legs growing out, just like how I read about that testimony of an arm growing out, right? Now, I'll be honest, it's not like a whole leg missing. It's just like several inches off, like maybe 2 or 3 inches. But it's still obviously noticeable because she has back problems, so her hips are not aligned. I've never seen it done. I've just heard about these things being done, about legs growing out. So I remember me being the faith healer of the conference. I was acting confident. I'm like, come forward. And I had her sit in front of me, and there were people watching me who were also from the university who attended this conference. And I just, you kind of have to fake it till you make it. So I was acting like I've done this before, but I commanded the leg to come out. And then I literally saw the leg come out, and she went like that. And she just started crying. And even in my own mind, I acted like I was playing it cool as if I've done that before. But that was my first time. I was like, in my mind, I'm like, oh my gosh, I just saw a leg grow out, And so that became a normal thing that I started to do a lot, where I noticed there's a lot of people who have back pains that a lot of times their legs are shorter than the other, or their arms are shorter than the other. And we've seen things grow like that. So that has been very powerful. I mean, seeing people with cancer being healed has been very powerful. There's many things that I could be very grateful for without like saying this one's better than the other. But
it's hard though, because there's some things like you were talking about when you were disappointed when, you wanted a new hand.
Yeah.
Is there anybody been out there that has come to you and like still, how do you deal with, people still get disappointed. Like, let's say if they're like, they got stage 4 cancer and then like, stage 5 is coming up and like, well, there is no stage 5.
Yeah.
And so, how do you deal with that? That's gotta be hard.
You mean dealing it for myself?
Well, with yourself, or also dealing with other people when you're trying to pray for somebody and you pray a bunch, or you call it to the universe, you're like, okay, let's cure this guy, and then the next day he dies. Like, when it doesn't work, how do you work with that?
Well, I mean, obviously there are explanations for that. Even what we've learned from the afterlife community or people who communicate with the dead, there are reasons why people do die, because there are certain exit points that people have created during their pre-birth planning. I don't know how familiar you are with that stuff, but
pre-birth planning?
Yeah.
No, I don't know anything about it. What's that about?
Yeah, so supposedly this implies reincarnation, that we have many lives, right? So supposedly before you incarnate here, you actually plan out the major points of your life. You do. So it's not necessarily like God determining everything, but you and your guides, your spirit guide, and maybe your spirit group, you have this plan that you can create while you're here on earth, where there are these major points of your life. So I believe that me being born this way, and even me suffering, with these injuries, was part of the pre-birth planning. Now, the in-between parts, the details, are up for, you have free will every point of your life, but those things beforehand, there are some things you can plan beforehand, I mean. And so, but at the same time, you do determine your exit point of when you're gonna die. Now that's a whole other subject, bro. I don't know how deep you want to get into that, but according to the afterlife community,
let's keep it on a healing and how you've done that for this episode.
Yeah. So when it comes to people who don't get healed, so that's the thing. I don't promise people healing. I just offer to try, right? Like, so tomorrow I'm going to be praying for doing healing on a guy with a stroke. I'm not going to be promising him anything. I'm just going to try. So it's kind of like, it's like someone receiving a prayer of encouragement, So even if somebody doesn't get better on the spot, a lot of people have told me, say, Judge, I just feel encouraged that you even want to try helping me, because you were speaking so much encouragement. You know what I'm saying? Like that people don't get offended when I do this, and if they don't see immediate results, you know what I'm saying? Because I'm not promising them like you're gonna be walking 100% when you're out. Like I always just try to encourage them, say, hey, don't give up, because I didn't give up. I'm still not giving up, even for my hand. But I know if I gave up for my back, if I gave up for my GERD, who knows where I would be? Because it was a process, remember? So it's like I give people at least the encouragement, say, if you want to accept your condition, you can. Because believe it or not, it sounds weird, some people don't want to get healed. It's weird, but some people don't, because it's become their identity, where they've actually liked the attention, or they're on disability. You know what I'm saying? I mean, there's interesting
like if
reasons.
Helen Keller could start seeing and hearing all of a sudden, it'd be like, well, now, like before when it was a blind and deaf girl who could talk, that was something. But now it's just a girl who can talk and hear.
Yeah.
That's nothing.
Yeah, so there's a lot of reasons that we can speculate of why people don't get healed, but I just know that if someone doesn't get healed immediately in front of my eyes, I just encourage them and say, I'm going to keep you in my thoughts and my prayers, and keep doing what you're doing and taking steps of faith whenever you feel led to do so. Because I would never tell someone to do something that they don't want to do. I wouldn't tell like someone who has GERD, go eat this right now, even if you don't want to. No, they would have to make that choice.
Do you ever take your hands, like they do the thing with the psychic healers, where they're going into the stomach with a bunch of blood and everything? Like you have
the one in the Philippines. No, I don't do it. Like ripping out bacon or something like that. No, I don't do any of that stuff,
like they do that with the psychic healing. You see them like working their hands on it, and it gets all nasty, and they're like, "Hey, I pulled the tumor out," and it's it's probably like a goat's heart or something.
I know. Yeah, so that's the thing, bro. So that's what I've been able to kind of look back and filter. Just my experiences. I've learned that there are people out there who are fakes and out for your money and charlatans, but I've learned that, well, you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater, because these things are happening. Quote unquote miracles, whatever you want to call them, are happening all around the world. And, it's just people who are skeptical, they tend to throw it all out. They say, no, it's all BS. No, some of them probably are, but if you investigate more, how do you explain that? Whether you want to call it a miracle or not. So that's up to every individual to figure out for his or herself, But all I know, why I'm so confident in doing what I do, is because of my healing of my back and of my GERD. Because I tell people that, I'm like, you know what? If I went on this journey and my hand didn't get healed, and my GERDs didn't get healed or my back, I don't think I would be this confident believing in healing just because I'm reading a bunch of healing books. You know what I mean?
Sure,
I had to experience something personally for myself to convince me, no, it's real. Look at my life now. You know what I mean?
Now, have you ever like had a point where you're thinking about it? You're like, okay, well, I can help heal somebody. Like, let's say they got cancer and they're getting they're getting chemo. And you're like, well, they still got to get chemo, but maybe this is going to help them feel better, or this is going to help them, that positive attitude of somebody praying for them. That's going to be extra energy for them to get through and want to survive or want to make it through the tough times.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen like an example of something in your own life where you see somebody who didn't get prayed for, and then immediately conked out or whatever, and somebody who did get prayed for? Like, even have you ever healed somebody who didn't want to be healed?
Not
in
that
the
I
way
know
of
of.
they didn't believe in it. They didn't believe in it,
sure.
and they were healed anyway.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, for sure. 100%. Yeah, because if you know more about my journey, bro, when I first started speaking on healing back in 2006, my quote unquote ministry were for the skeptics. So when I would speak, majority of my engagements were skeptical people because I wanted them to see that they can identify with my story. Like, hey, I was just like you, where I don't believe in this stuff too. That's why I would do demonstrations of healing in all of my gatherings. That's how I did it back in the day, for sure. So it wasn't preaching to the choir, you know what I'm saying? And so there were people there who are like, yeah, I don't believe. I said, it's all good. Here, give me your hand, or give me your leg, or whatever. And boom, it's gone. Why did they get healed? They didn't believe. They don't have to believe, but I believed. You see the difference? Because it's just like saying, if we put all the faith on the person being prayed for, there's going to be some confusing issues. Because like if you believe that the Bible is true, right? Somebody says, okay, Lazarus was raised from the dead. How did he get raised from the dead? Is it because he had a lot of faith? Well, he was dead. Jesus raised him from the dead. If you were to believe that's true, some people don't believe in that.
Well, talking about Christianity real quick, and why did you eventually break to where you said, earlier said today you don't consider yourself a Christian anymore, but obviously you still consider yourself a spiritual person because you're getting messages from somewhere.
Sure.
Why did you break from Christianity into a different realm? And is there a new realm of things? You're like, okay, well, Jesus is actually Xenu or whatever. Like, why did you break from that?
Right. Yeah. So that was quite a process for me that took several years. And so that happened when I was out here as a missionary, believe it or not. What a surprising time to start questioning your faith. So what I realized while I was studying apologetics, even though I studied a lot of anti-Christian texts, I would read atheist books, non-Christian books, agnostic books, but I've always had the assumption that Christianity was true, right? But when I got to the Philippines, I just started to question a lot more because I just started to notice what a bubble the Christian world can be, like with our own language, and we're the in-group, you're the out-group, we're saved, you're not, they're going to hell, we're going to heaven. And it just that was not resonating with me anymore, especially thinking that a lot of these people that I know and love who don't know Jesus the way I understood Jesus at the time is going to be in hell for all eternity. You know what I'm saying? And so that's why experience was one of the things, just like reality, just looking at people like, so this Buddhist guy is going to go to hell forever, but Hitler is probably going to be in heaven if he just says a sinner's prayer, like, come on, that just sounds weird, And another thing that really opened up my eyes was healing, because my whole life as doing healing, I was always doing it the Christian version, because that's all that I read. So, and that's all that I was modeled, that I looked at, so I would always do healing where I would be casting out demons or do things in Jesus' name, be healed, because that's just what I would read in the Bible. But then I would always hear about other people doing Reiki and all that other stuff. I'm like, I wasn't familiar with that stuff. But then when I started to question my faith, I started to explore different healing modalities like energetic healing, quantum healing, Reiki, all that stuff. And I'm like, dude, all that is still the same. It's all the same. It's just semantics, So when someone says they're feeling Holy Ghost on the body, that's why they're shaking. Another person who's spiritual will say, no, that's just energy. Or another person having like a Holy Ghost encounter where they're shaking and they're feeling all this stuff in their back. Another person, no, that's Kundalini. You know what I'm saying? It's like, it's the human experience that I feel like Christianity just made the world too small for me. I felt like the universe is much, much bigger than my little Christian paradigm that I had for all these years. And so
do you still feel like, okay, so even if you're saying that the universe is bigger than just Christianity, do you still feel like there might be a heaven, or do you still feel like there might be another plane, or do you think that this is very physical, like the energy you feel might be just some kind of electricity or an energy source we haven't discovered yet?
Yeah. And so this goes back to 2006, while I was still a Christian, and I didn't know how to interpret this at the time, but this is when I was starting to experience what we would call out-of-body experiences or astral projection, whatever you want to call it. So this was back in 2006. I was still a pastor, speaker, all that stuff. And I was in the library, and I decided to lie down on the floor on the beanbag. And all of a sudden, I saw this extremely bright light shining on me. And I was fully awake, fully conscious. And I remember the first words that went on in my mind was, I've heard about this. And I was very calm. And I heard this sound go like that, like it was like electricity or energy. And I felt this extremely, extremely intense electricity all throughout my body to the point where it felt like I was being crushed. So you could just imagine like me, like almost grinding my teeth kind of feeling. I was like, oh, like that, where I felt like I was being smashed, to be honest. And I wasn't hurt. It wasn't painful, but it was extremely uncomfortable, like I was being smashed. And I had sleep paralysis, so I couldn't move, I couldn't talk, and I had this really loud ringing in my ear. And then all of it went away, and then it came back 2 more times. It was weird. And I noticed, though, that I didn't feel any evil presence, because I've heard from my friends that when they had sleep paralysis, they felt like evil and demons and stuff. I felt none of that. It was a very neutral, weird experience. And so that happened in 2006. And then not too long after that, I was in the library again. I didn't know how to explain that, to be honest. I just kind of left it alone. I was like, what was that? I don't know. Then again, I was in the library. Yeah, I was in the library again. I was just going to chill on the beanbag and just probably take a nap. And then when I was lying down on the floor on the beanbag in a particular aisle, all of a sudden, literally all of a sudden, I was in another part of the library. I was in a different aisle. And I was like, what? Where am I? What the heck? Like I was looking around, it's the same library, everything, but I was in a different aisle and my vision was very gloomy. It was very dim, as though like somebody dimmed the lights, right? So it wasn't completely dark, but there was a little bit of light, but I was fully conscious, fully aware, just like how I'm awake right now talking to you. So it was definitely not a dream, because I've been a lucid dreamer ever since I was a little kid. I have a lot of fun in my dreams, right? Like, so lucid dreaming, for those who don't know, is that when you're just become conscious in your dream that you're dreaming, right? And you could play around and fly and do stuff like that. It wasn't that like that, because there was a different texture to it, because it was as if I'm fully awake the way I'm talking to you right now. So I come back to my body, boom. I still didn't know what that was. And I eventually found out that those 2 instances, I was experiencing something called a vibrational state, which is like, the precursor to an OBE. So when you're feeling the sleep paralysis, you're feeling the buzz, and some people don't see the light, but I saw the light. Those were actually like a prelude to an OBE. So the first time I was experiencing that, I didn't come out of my body because I didn't know what was happening. The second time I experienced the vibrations and stuff again, but I actually came out of my body, but I don't know how to do it. It just happened, right? And so later on, several years later, like I said, I've always been fascinated with near-death experiences and OBEs. But I always felt like they were only for special people, honestly, right? Like I would ask about like that Willie Beeson guy that I met in 2006. Maybe there was a special plan for him, or, these other NDE stories that I would hear, like maybe God just calls certain people to do it, But then I was finding out about people who learned how to do it. And I was like, what? You can learn how to project, astral project? And so as I've already mentioned, like I just started eating this stuff up, all the content that I could find. I would stay up every night reading, learning, listening to stuff, watching stuff, learning how to astral project. And so I tried it for several months. Like I would even tell my wife, oh, I'm going to project tonight, and then nothing would happen. Until one day, boom, it happened. And it started happening regularly, where I would have several OBEs a month. And I've been doing that ever since for several years now. In my life, that's what has also opened me up more to our universe, that there's more to just this physical earth and then heaven and hell. You know what I'm saying?
So when you are traveling, like, where do you go? Like, if you have an out of body experience, like where do you go? Like, do you use that for your healing at all? Like, you go visit somebody else's body and
you can.
Like,
there's many instances of stuff like that happening. People like my friend Willie, or my last guest that was on my podcast a month ago. He was able to heal his arthritis. And my guest that's going to be on my show next week, he was also healed. I think he healed his wife. You know, so in the astral realm, it's very interesting where your thoughts are it's more thought responsive, meaning that whatever you think, the manifestation is a lot quicker. Unlike here, right? If you do believe in something called a law of attraction, where you're able to attract certain things with the thoughts that you put out, it's more like a slow motion version here on this physical earth. But when you're in these astral states, they're almost immediate. So for example, you think of something like an apple appears in front of you. You think of going to a place, you go there right away. So in the beginning, when I first started having OBEs, I was still a newbie. So my OBEs were very short. So as far as I can go, I would only lift up out of my body, and I would turn around and flip over and I would see my body. But they were like very quick, you know, where it just didn't very last long because I didn't know how to maintain how to stay out of body. But then over time, actually, I learned quickly though. Eventually, I was able to prolong my experiences where I started traveling. I could give an example. So there was one time I lifted up out of my body, and all of a sudden I commanded myself to go to the door. So I said, "Door now." Boom, I was at my door. As I was at the door, I turned around and I saw my condo. It was exactly the same. My condo here that I'm sitting in right now is exactly the same. I was like, and I was even reminding myself in the out of body. I'm like, all right, it's the same. I could tell people that I saw the same thing, you know.
So but is your body the same as it is in the so do you have both hands in the astral world? Are you taller? It's the same. So are you translucent? Is your skin color the same?
It's funny, but sometimes I don't even think about it. Like, honestly, I don't even think about it at all. But I have had instances where it does seem to be that my hand is still the same. For example, I had a OBE 2 weeks ago. I had 2 OBEs in one night, and all of a sudden I ended up in this place that I don't know where, but they were speaking Spanish. It was a really big supermarket. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm here. You know, I'm in a supermarket and I don't know if people could see me. So I tapped somebody on the shoulder and he looked at me and I was like, oh, I can touch people here. You know, and I remember one moment I took money out of my pocket and I was holding the money with my right hand. And I didn't look at my hand, but from what I'm aware, when I hold the money to my chest, it's because I can't hold it with my fingers, with my palm. So I didn't look at it, but that could kind of infer that my hand is still the same the way it is now. Right.
But you're also inferring that you're wearing clothes in your OBE because you took money out of your pocket.
Yeah. So I was wearing. Oh yeah. So you're sometimes you can look the same and sometimes you can look different. Because this sounds funny, but I'm pretty much half naked here because it's very hot here in the Philippines, so I don't sleep with many clothes on. So, but that was actually a concern of mine when I first started doing OBEs. I was like, dude, if I'm projecting tonight, I better wear clothes or people will see me in my underwear. You know. But it's funny, but it's weird. But it's as if your higher self knows how to like dress you up when you're out. But I remember I did want to take a look at myself, where there was a time when I ended up at this person's house and like I was there 100% and I didn't even know I was out of body because it was that clear. So I was like, what the heck, dude? Is this a dream or is this out of body or am I really here? The only way that I knew that I was out of body is because I put my hand through the wall. And I was like, oh snap, all right, I'm in the out of body state. And then I said, let me look at myself in the mirror. When I looked in the mirror, I looked exactly the same. Actually, I didn't even have a shirt on the way I am right now. And my hair was messy and I looked exactly the same. But I've heard other people who've astral projected and they saw different things. I'm just speaking from my own personal experience.
But when you astral projected into somebody's house, you looked like you could reflect light onto yourself. You looked like you were physical enough to... And then when you projected onto the store, when you could tap somebody in the shoulder. Now, do you have knowledge? And... I know we'll get back to some healing stuff in just 1 second for a couple final questions. But did you have knowledge in the astral realm that you don't have in the physical? Like, could you? I don't know if you're a native or you can speak Spanish at all.
No. So when I was there, I was thinking the way I do now. That's why I was like, the only words that I picked up I remember I heard the word nosotros several times, at least twice. I was like, all right, because I always try to take my astral experiences as like a reporter. I don't want to have an explanation like, God said means such and such symbol. I just
Right.
want to report. So when I was there, I was like, I don't know where I am. They're speaking Spanish. It could be Spain. It could be Mexico. I don't know. So I was just like
it could
trying
be
to.
Cleveland.
Yeah, who knows? So all I do know is that I heard a lot of Spanish, but it was interesting because when I tried to buy a hot dog from the guy, and I changed my mind, the guy spoke to me in Tagalog, and he said, "Oh, ayaw mo," that means you don't want. And I remember I looked at him like, why did you just speak to me in Tagalog? So that was also like a weird thing that happened.
So you were communicating with somebody in a language you understand.
Yeah.
And he could, even though you were projecting, he could see you.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, because I was gonna buy a hot dog from.
All right.
Yeah.
And so I'd be interested. You changed your mind about the hot dog? I'd be
Yeah.
interested. Can you eat things when you astral project?
Of course, yeah. Even when I was in a supermarket, I ate something that came in my mouth and it was like super sweet. So what people don't realize is that in certain planes of reality, like it's just as physical as it is here, and that's something that I'm trying to challenge. Not just the skeptics who don't believe in this stuff at all, but I'm also trying to give a little bit of a challenge and pushback to some of the New Age community who think that the afterlife is all about lovey-dovey, light and love. There's no suffering. There's no physicality. We're all just like we could go through walls. No. My experiences have been different, and my friends who also do the same thing, it's been different, where there are times where we were able to go through walls and there were times where we weren't able to go through walls. Or there are people who have habits that are not so good here, where when they cross over, they still have those bad habits. Whether it's smoking or being alcoholics or whatever. Because what I was taught, bro, as a Christian is that you could do whatever the hell you want. Then on your deathbed, if you sincerely believe it in your heart, you say, Jesus, come into my heart, boom, your slate's white clean and you go to heaven, right? It's like, you're just clean because of the death of Jesus and stuff. And these realities are showing me otherwise. And that's why I'm more open to challenging the dogma that I've seen, that I was taught, because that's why I put a lot of responsibility on people now that you got to get your shit together now if you want a good afterlife. Granted, you will see loved ones on the other side, but your consciousness still continues. So like if someone, because when you think about it, right, and I'm not encouraging this at all, but if heaven is such a blissful place for everyone who just dies, who is religious, and you're depressed and suicidal, why not just kill yourself and just end up, but of course, if someone's suicidal, you'll do your best to say, no, life's worth living. But obviously for the suicidal person, they're thinking, no, it's not, especially in those moments. You know what I'm saying?
That's why the church so long has said that suicide is the gravest sin you can do.
Right.
And even, Dante had a special place in hell for the suicides.
Yeah. Right. So like even to a lot of Catholics and even some Christians, they will see is that like, it's like almost like an unforgivable thing that you can do. And so what I'm telling people is that, hey, if our consciousness continues and you're full of anger and hatred and suicide, what you're doing when you die and you cross over is that you're just bringing your problems to another location. You're still going to be you. That's why it's so important to continue to evolve. That's why, if this is up to debate, but that's why there is such a thing as reincarnation, to continue to, come back to earth and make different choices that are better, because we're continually evolving forever. There's not going to be this one state where like everything's all perfect and done. No, we're continually going to be evolving to higher states of consciousness, in my understanding.
Now, a couple more questions on healing, and I know we're going a little bit over time here, but I'm
sure.
Still interested. So do you think that some of that healing, or like not necessarily disability, but sickness or things like that, they manifest in the next life for attitudes or feelings that you had in the previous life?
Oh, so you're saying what people have now, was it a consequence of what people had previously in another life? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah. So that kind of idea.
Yeah. There's a possibility. So for example, that's why this is up for debate. It's up for conversation. Like, why is my hand born this way? That's one. We could take my personal life, right? So as a Christian, I was taught God did this so he could heal you one day to display his power. Another Christian can say God did this to teach you a lesson, to, don't take things. There's always things that we could speculate. Now,
right.
When it comes to those who have had like past lives or past life regression or things like that, there's a possibility that I could have lost my arm in a battle. You know what I mean? Like in a war. So it's interesting, but people who have had wounds supposedly in their previous lives, they have birthmarks in those exact spots where they've been shot. Like that. So it's as if there's some sort of continuity there. You know what I'm saying? And so,
Sure.
I mean, it's not just physical stuff, but just personality wise. You look at, I mean, you don't have to believe this, but it is something that's interesting. You find kids that are like prodigies, where their whole family, they're not musically inclined at all. And this kid's like a stinking prodigy, you know, on the piano. It's like, where the hell did that come from? And so we don't, you know, want to say absolutely, oh, it's just a previous life. They were a Mozart or Beethoven. Who knows? But I'm just saying that it should start a conversation that there might be something more to it.
And so if somebody is sick or has something that they're interested in trying out some spiritual help for their illness, what are the first couple suggestions that you would say if you want to try to, if let's say you want to get some spiritual help for your sickness in addition to going to see the doctor or whatever,
Sure.
the doctor's like, well, there's nothing we can really do about it. Okay,
Yeah.
well, maybe I can pray. And what would be the first couple of suggestions if somebody's sick and they're looking for some of that spiritual healing?
Sure. Well, I mean, my advice would be that to change their thinking. And the only way they can do that is by changing their subconscious mind, right? And so I would encourage a person to do as much research or listen to something to start shifting their perspective that there might be a possibility for them to get better. Because when someone tells you that you have terminal cancer and there's no hope, you're going to die, you took it by a person of authority, like a doctor, you know? And so it's like, if thoughts are things and our thoughts are able to manifest certain things in our body, such as sicknesses, I mean, that's proven, honestly. You know, like, I mean, I even wrote about that in my second book that, you know, when you have negative thoughts, it releases chemicals, you know, negative things into your blood, you know, where your muscles get weaker, you know what I'm saying? But when you think positive thoughts, it releases all these other, you know, types of chemicals to your body that makes you more energetic and, you know, healthy. And that's why when you're in love, you're like really, really happy and you can stay up all night. But when you start having fear and you get depressed, your body starts to reflect that, you know, so from within, so without. And I remember when I had my GERD, having my friends tell me that I'm going to live with this forever. I even have a very sad memory of when I found out what GERD was. And I was looking at a medical book that had an image of what it looks like inside a person's body who has GERD. And I remember the moment I saw that photo, I put the book down. And this is like past midnight, bro. I put it down and I started running outside because I had so much fear. Like, I have to exercise. Oh my gosh. Like I panicked. But the whole time I was exercising and running, I was just 100% fear. And like I said, all I did was get worse. No matter what I did, medication, nothing worked. It wasn't until I started having that shift in perspective, and it's different for everybody. What will get you to shift, to start thinking differently, that there might be a possibility for you to get better? I would keep feeding that and continue to go in that direction if you want to get better.
All right. So where can people find more information about you, Josh, if they want to find your books?
Cool.
If they want to check out your website and stuff like that so they can learn more a little bit about Josh Tongol and his spiritual journey from Christian to skeptic to spiritualist healer and traveler of the astral realms, where can they find you?
Yeah, you can find it all on my website. It's just my name, joshuatongol.com. My last name is spelled Tongol. I have a YouTube channel, and I've written 2 books on my journey, one having to do with more the religious journey, and my second book, which is more of like a self-help metaphysical book and talking a lot about self-love, where I talk a lot about my struggles with my hand. And I also have a podcast just like you, bro. It's called The Flip Side, and we're currently doing a series on astral projection and spirituality in the afterlife. So if you're interested in that, you can check that out as well. So, yeah.
All right. Thanks, Josh.
Thanks a lot, bro.
So Josh is a pretty interesting guy, and he's had a story. I mean, I think it's interesting just the whole being born without a hand thing.
Yeah.
And confronting that and still having an incredible amount of faith, I think is powerful.